March 19th, 1945. Allied Headquarters, Belgium. The order was simple. Regiment-level attack order. Standard format. Typed on military stationery. Signed by a colonel. Ready for distribution to battalion commanders. Private First Class Arthur Walsh sat at his desk in the operations office, preparing to type the final copy for official distribution. His job was simple. Take the handwritten draft, type it cleanly, exactly as written. No changes, no corrections, no interpretation, just accurate transcription. That was what clerks did. They processed paperwork. They didn't make decisions. They didn't question orders. They certainly didn't change them. But as Arthur read the handwritten order one more time before typing, he saw something that made his hands freeze over the typewriter keys. A mistake. Not a typo. Not a formatting error. A tactical mistake. The order directed the 2nd Battalion to attack from the north approach. Standard flanking maneuver. Sound tactics. Except, Arthur had processed the reconnaissance report that morning. The same report that should have informed this attack order. And that report clearly stated that the north approach was heavily mined. German defensive positions covering the entire sector. Impassable without massive casualties. The south approach was the viable route. Limited defenses, clear lanes. The reconnaissance team had specifically recommended it. But this order, written by a colonel who'd apparently either not read the report or misunderstood it, was sending an entire battalion directly into the most heavily defended sector. Arthur looked at the order again, read it twice, then 3 times. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe he'd misunderstood the reconnaissance report. But no. He'd typed that report himself this morning, had read it carefully to ensure accuracy. The north approach was a death trap, and this order was sending 800 men straight into it. Arthur's training screamed at him to type it anyway. It wasn't his job to question orders. He was a clerk, a typist, not a tactician, not an officer. If there was a mistake, someone above his pay grade would catch it, wouldn't they? But Arthur had been in this office for 9 months, had processed hundreds of orders, and he'd learned something that made him profoundly uncomfortable. Officers were human. They made mistakes. They overlooked details. They signed documents without reading them carefully. And when they did, people died. Arthur looked at the typewriter, at the blank paper loaded and ready, at the handwritten order sitting beside it. He had a choice. Type it exactly as written. Follow protocol. Let 800 men walk into a minefield because it wasn't his job to correct a colonel's mistake. Or change it. Type south approach instead of north approach. 1 word, 2 letters different. A change so small it would be almost invisible. Except it would mean the difference between a successful attack and a massacre. Arthur's hands hovered over the keys. What he didn't know yet, what he couldn't have predicted, was that his decision in the next 10 seconds would save not just those 800 men, but would expose a fundamental flaw in military command structure, that critical decisions were being made by people who didn't have all the information, and that sometimes the person with the most complete picture was the lowest-ranking soldier in the room, the one no one thought to listen to. Who was Arthur Walsh? Arthur Michael Walsh was born in 1923 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Working-class neighborhood. His father was a bookkeeper for a steel company. Meticulous, detail-oriented. The kind of man who caught errors in ledgers that accountants missed. Arthur inherited that trait. By age 12, he was helping his father balance books for the family business. By 15, he'd caught an accounting error that would have cost the company thousands of dollars. Arthur wasn't naturally analytical. He wasn't mathematically gifted or intellectually brilliant. But he paid attention to details, to patterns, to things that didn't quite match. His high school teachers found him frustrating. He'd question textbook examples when they contained logical inconsistencies. He'd point out when homework problems had multiple correct answers that the answer key didn't account for. Not because he wanted to be difficult, but because inaccuracy bothered him. Wrong information led to wrong decisions, and wrong decisions had consequences. When the war started, Arthur enlisted in August 1942. Told the recruiter he was good with paperwork. The Army tested him. Typing speed, excellent. Attention to detail, exceptional. Administrative aptitude, perfect score. You're going to be a clerk, the assignment officer said. Headquarters company. You'll process orders, maintain records, handle administrative support. Arthur didn't mind. Combat didn't appeal to him. But helping the war effort through administrative work? That made sense. He went through basic training, then clerk school, learning military paperwork formats, order structures, report procedures. And one rule above all others: your job is accuracy. Type exactly what's written. Don't interpret. Don't correct. Just transcribe. Arthur understood. But he also knew that sometimes what was written was wrong. And transcribing it accurately meant perpetuating a mistake that could cost lives. By March 1945, Arthur had been assigned to division headquarters for 9 months. He'd typed thousands of orders, most of them routine, some of them critical. And he'd learned to recognize patterns. Attack orders that didn't match reconnaissance reports, supply requisitions that contradicted unit strengths, movement orders that ignored terrain assessments. Small inconsistencies, usually harmless, but occasionally, very occasionally, dangerous. Arthur had flagged a few of these to his supervisor, a master sergeant named Kowalski. Kowalski would check, sometimes find that Arthur was right, make corrections. Other times, tell Arthur to mind his own business and type what he was given. But Arthur had never directly changed an order, never altered what was written. That would be insubordination, possibly court-martial, definitely the end of his career. But sitting at his desk on March 19th, staring at an order that would send 800 men into a minefield, Arthur realized something. That following the rules wasn't always the same thing as doing the right thing. What Arthur didn't know, what he'd only learn later, was that his understanding of administrative systems and his compulsive attention to detail were about to collide in a decision that would redefine how the military thought about administrative personnel and their role in preventing disasters. The report. Everyone had ignored. The reconnaissance report had been filed at 0800 hours that morning. Standard format. Scout team from 2nd Battalion. 3-man patrol. Mission: assess approaches to enemy-held town. The report was clear. North approach. Heavily fortified. Multiple machine gun nests covering road. Evidence of extensive mining. German observation post with clear fields of fire. Assessment: impassable without preparatory artillery and engineer support. South approach. Lightly defended. Single checkpoint. No evidence of mining. Limited visibility from enemy positions. Assessment: viable for infantry assault. The recommendation was explicit. Recommend attack from south approach. The report had been filed in the operations office, logged, distributed to relevant officers, including the colonel who'd written the attack order. But somewhere between filing and decision-making, the information had gotten lost, or misread, or simply not considered carefully. Arthur didn't know why the colonel had written north approach in the attack order. Maybe the colonel was working from outdated intelligence. Maybe he'd confused this objective with another. Maybe he'd simply made a mistake under pressure. It didn't matter why. What mattered was that the order was wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Arthur pulled out the reconnaissance report from the morning's files. Read it again. No ambiguity. North approach. Heavily defended. Mined. South approach. viable. Then he looked at the attack order. 2nd Battalion will advance from north approach at 600 hours tomorrow. One word. North instead of south. Arthur sat at his desk, hands on the typewriter, trying to decide what to do. The safe choice was obvious. Type it as written. If it was a mistake, someone else would catch it. The battalion commander, the operations officer. Someone. But Arthur had worked in this office long enough to know that wasn't how things actually worked. Officers trusted that orders coming from higher command were correct. They didn't second-guess colonels. They executed. And if the order was wrong, they'd discover that when their men started stepping on mines. Arthur looked around the office. Empty. Most of the staff were at lunch, just him and the typewriter, and a decision he wasn't qualified to make. Except, in a way, he was the most qualified, because he was the only person who'd read both the reconnaissance report and the attack order, the only person who'd seen the contradiction. Arthur made his decision the way most critical decisions are made, quickly, before doubt could paralyze him. He rolled paper into the typewriter and started typing. But when he reached the approach direction, his fingers typed, "South approach, not north." South. One word changed. 2 letters different. A modification so small that unless someone compared the typed order to the original handwritten draft, which no one ever did, no one would notice. Arthur finished typing, pulled the paper from the typewriter, read it once more. Perfect format. Perfect accuracy. Except for one word. The word that would keep 800 men out of a minefield. He filed the typed order in the distribution folder, put the handwritten draft in the archive file, standard procedure, and went back to work on other documents, as if nothing had happened. What Arthur didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that his one-word change would trigger a chain of events that would force military leadership to confront an uncomfortable truth. That command decisions were only as good as the information that informed them, and that sometimes the people with the best information were the ones nobody thought to ask. The attack that succeeded. The 2nd Battalion received their attack order at 1600 hours. Battalion Commander, Major Richard Cross, reviewed it with his staff. We advance from south approach at obo 600 tomorrow. Light defenses expected. Engineers will clear any obstacles. Questions? His operations officer looked at the map. South approach makes sense, sir. Reconnaissance reported north was heavily defended. Exactly, Cross said. Regiment wants us to hit them where they're weak. Smart tactics. The staff nodded. The attack plan was developed around the south approach. Infantry companies assigned positions. Artillery support coordinated. Engineers prepared obstacle-clearing equipment. By midnight, the battalion was ready. At 0600 the next morning, they advanced. From the south. The attack went almost perfectly. The German checkpoint was overrun in the first 15 minutes. Light resistance. Minimal casualties. The battalion pushed through and secured the objective by 0800. Total casualties. 4 wounded. None killed. A textbook success. Major Cross filed his after-action report with a note of satisfaction. Attack proceeded as planned. South approach proved optimal. Minimal enemy resistance. The report went up the chain. Regiment headquarters. Division headquarters. Filed alongside hundreds of other after-action reports from successful operations. Routine. Unremarkable. No one questioned it. No one wondered why the attack had gone so smoothly. And no one, not the battalion commander, not the regimental staff, not even the colonel who'd written the order, realized that the attack order they'd received wasn't the one that had been written. Arthur heard about the attack's success later that day. Routine morning briefing. 2nd Battalion secured objective with minimal casualties. He felt relief. Overwhelming relief. Mixed with terror. Because if anyone discovered what he'd done, If anyone compared the filed attack order to the original handwritten draft, he'd be court-martialed, possibly imprisoned. Changing orders was falsifying documents, a serious offense. But no one checked. The operation was successful. The paperwork was filed. Everyone moved on to the next mission. And Arthur went back to typing orders, exactly as written. Most of the time. What Arthur didn't know, what he wouldn't discover for 3 more weeks, was that his secret wouldn't stay secret, because someone was about to notice something that didn't add up. The discovery that exposed everything. 3 weeks after the successful attack, the regimental operations officer, a lieutenant colonel named Harrison, was reviewing after-action reports for a lessons learned analysis. Standard procedure. Analyze successful operations. Identify best practices. Apply them to future planning. Harrison was going through the 2nd Battalion attack when something caught his attention. The after-action report mentioned, "South approach attack as planned." But Harrison distinctly remembered the planning meeting for that operation. The original discussion had been about using the north approach. He'd questioned it at the time, thought it seemed risky based on reconnaissance. But the colonel had been confident, made the decision, written the order. Yet the battalion had attacked from the south. Harrison pulled the filed attack order, read it carefully. 2nd Battalion will advance from south approach. Clear. Unambiguous. But that didn't match his memory of the colonel's decision. Harrison walked to the archives, found the original handwritten draft of the order, read it. 2nd Battalion will advance from north approach. North, not south. Harrison stared at both documents. The handwritten original said north. The typed, distributed version said south. Someone had changed it. Harrison's first thought was, administrative error. Typo. Simple mistake during transcription. But the implications made his blood run cold. If the order had been typed correctly, if the battalion had attacked from the north as the colonel intended, they would have walked into a heavily defended minefield sector. Casualties would have been catastrophic. Someone's mistake had saved 800 lives. Harrison took both documents to the colonel. "Sir, we have a problem." He laid out both versions of the order. The colonel read them. His face went pale. "Who typed this order?" "Private Walsh, sir. Operations clerk." "Get him. Now." Arthur was summoned to the colonel's office 20 minutes later. He walked in knowing exactly why he was there. The colonel and Lieutenant Colonel Harrison sat at the desk, both documents laid out between them. "Private Walsh," the colonel said, his voice controlled but cold. "Did you type this order?" He pointed to the distributed version. "Yes, sir." "Did you notice that it says south instead of north?" Arthur hesitated. Then, "Yes, sir." Silence. The colonel's expression darkened. "You changed it?" "Yes, sir." "You falsified an official military order?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that's court-martial offense?" Arthur met his eyes. "Yes, sir." The colonel leaned back. "Explain." Arthur took a breath. "Sir, I'd typed the reconnaissance report that morning. It clearly stated the north approach was heavily defended and mined. The south approach was viable. When I saw the attack order directing the battalion north, I knew it was a mistake. I changed it because I believed following the original order would result in massive casualties." The colonel's jaw tightened. "That wasn't your decision to make, Private." "No, sir. But I made it anyway." "You had no authority." "I had the information, sir. The complete information. And I knew that if I followed protocol and typed the order as written, men would die." Harrison spoke up. "Sir, if I may." Private Walsh was correct. The north approach was a death trap. If the battalion had attacked there, we'd be filing casualty reports instead of success reports. The colonel looked at Harrison, then back at Arthur. "That doesn't excuse falsifying an order." "No, sir," Arthur said quietly. but I'd rather face a court-martial than live with not acting when I could have prevented deaths. The colonel was silent for a long moment. Then he stood. "Private Walsh, you're dismissed, for now. Don't leave the compound." Arthur saluted, left, and waited to find out if he'd saved lives only to lose his freedom. What Arthur didn't know, what he'd only learn later, was that the conversation continuing in that office was about to change everything. The debate that changed policy. The colonel called an emergency meeting with Division Command, not about punishment, about process. The meeting included the division commander, a brigadier general, along with operations staff, intelligence officers, and administrative supervisors. The colonel laid out what had happened. A clerk changed an attack order, without authorization. The order I wrote was wrong. The order he typed was correct. And because of his change, we avoided significant casualties. The general listened carefully. "What would have happened if he'd typed it as written?" the intelligence officer answered. "Based on reconnaissance, the battalion would have encountered heavy resistance and extensive mining. Estimated casualties, 30 to 40% of the battalion, 200 to 300 men." The general nodded slowly. "So this clerk committed insubordination that saved 200 lives." "Correct, sir." "That presents a problem." The operations officer spoke. "Sir, we can't condone subordinates altering orders. That undermines the entire command structure." "I agree," the general said. "But we also can't ignore that our command structure nearly killed 200 men." "Why did the colonel's order contradict the reconnaissance?" The colonel answered quietly. "Sir, I wrote the order based on my memory of the planning discussion. I didn't reread the reconnaissance report. I was working from what I thought I remembered, not what the report actually said. It was my mistake." The general looked at him. An honest mistake, but a nearly fatal one. How many other orders are being written without referencing source documents? Silence. How many other mistakes are being caught by junior personnel who don't have authority to correct them? More silence. The general continued. "Gentlemen, we have a systemic problem. Officers make decisions based on incomplete or misremembered information. Orders are written without cross-referencing intelligence reports. And the people who process those orders, who actually read all the relevant documents, have no authority to point out contradictions." He looked at the administrative supervisor. "How many clerks do we have processing orders?" "Approximately 40, sir, across division headquarters. And they all read reconnaissance reports, intelligence summaries, logistics assessments." "Yes, sir. They file everything. So they have a more complete picture of the information landscape than most officers." "Potentially, yes, sir." The general sat back. "Then we're wasting a critical asset. These clerks are seeing patterns and contradictions that we're missing, and we've told them their only job is to type accurately. That needs to change." The operations officer frowned. "Sir, are you suggesting we give clerks authority to question command decisions?" "I'm suggesting we give them authority to flag contradictions, to bring inconsistencies to our attention, not to make tactical decisions, but to ensure we're making them with complete information." He turned to the administrative supervisor. "Draft new procedures. Administrative personnel who notice contradictions between orders and supporting documents are required. Not just authorized, required. To bring those contradictions to the attention of the issuing officer before the order is distributed." "Yes, sir." The general looked at the colonel. "As for Private Walsh, he committed insubordination. Technically, he should face charges. But he also prevented a disaster caused by our failure to verify information. I'm recommending a formal reprimand in his file. But no court-martial. And I'm reassigning him to operations planning. If he's that good at catching mistakes, let's put him somewhere he can prevent them instead of having to correct them after the fact." What the general didn't say What would only become clear over the following months was that Private Walsh's one-word change had exposed a vulnerability that existed throughout the entire military command structure. That critical decisions were being made without complete information, and that the people with access to that information had been trained to stay silent. That was about to change. The procedures born from one change, within 8 weeks, new administrative procedures were implemented across the entire division, then Army-wide, called Administrative Review Protocol. The core principle was simple. Any clerk or administrative specialist who noticed contradictions between orders and source documents was required to flag it. Not change it, not fix it themselves, but bring it to the attention of a supervising officer. The process was formal. If a clerk identified a potential contradiction, they filled out a review form, citing the order, citing the source document, explaining the discrepancy. The form went to a designated review officer, usually the operations officer or intelligence officer. The review officer had 24 hours to assess the flag, either confirm the order was correct as written or authorize a correction. It added a small layer of bureaucracy, but it created a safety net. Arthur was assigned to help implement the new procedures, training clerks on what to look for, how to identify meaningful contradictions versus minor inconsistencies, when to flag and when to trust the command decision. Most of the clerks were skeptical at first. "We're not supposed to question officers," one corporal said. Arthur responded, "You're not questioning the decision. You're verifying that the decision is based on complete information. There's a difference." The first month, over 60 flags were filed. Most of them were false alarms, minor inconsistencies that didn't affect tactical decisions. But seven flags identified real problems, orders that contradicted recent intelligence, supply requisitions that didn't match unit strengths, movement orders that ignored terrain assessments. All of them were corrected before being distributed, and all of them could have caused operational failures or casualties. By the end of the war, the Administrative Review Protocol had become standard across the European theater, and it was being recommended for adoption in the Pacific. Arthur never received a medal for changing that order, never got public recognition for the system he helped create. He received a formal reprimand that stayed in his file, and a reassignment to operations planning, where his attention to detail could be used proactively instead of reactively. But the men of 2nd Battalion, the 800 men who'd attacked from the south instead of the north, never knew how close they'd come to disaster. Never knew that a clerk had saved their lives by changing one word in an order. They just knew the operation had been successful, and they'd gone home after the war, to families, to futures, to lives that almost ended in a minefield because a colonel made an honest mistake and a private broke the rules to fix it. The clerk who became an auditor. Arthur returned to Philadelphia in November 1945, back to civilian life. He could have gone back to bookkeeping, back to working with his father. But something had changed. Arthur had learned that systems, even important systems run by smart people, made mistakes. And that catching those mistakes mattered. He went to college on the GI Bill, studied accounting, then earned a certification as a public auditor. By 1950, Arthur was working for a major accounting firm, auditing corporations, government agencies, looking for the same kinds of things he'd looked for in the war: contradictions, inconsistencies, places where what was written didn't match what the data showed. He was exceptional at it, not because he was mathematically brilliant, but because he paid attention to details other auditors skipped over, to patterns that seemed almost right, but weren't quite. Arthur worked for 42 years, audited hundreds of organizations, caught financial irregularities that would have cost millions of dollars, prevented accounting frauds before they became scandals. He retired in 1992. died in 2006. Age 83. His obituary mentioned his career as an auditor, his contributions to financial oversight, his reputation for thoroughness. One sentence, just one, mentioned his military service. Served as administrative specialist, European theater, World War II. That was all. No mention of the order he changed. No mention of the lives he saved. No mention of the administrative system he helped create. But in military administrative training manuals, Arthur's case is still referenced. The Walsh correction. Teaching students that attention to detail isn't just about accuracy. It's about ensuring that information flows correctly through systems, and that sometimes the most junior person in the room has the most complete picture. The system built on one word. Today, military administrative systems include multiple verification steps. Orders are cross-referenced against source documents. Automated systems flag contradictions. Review officers verify consistency before distribution. It's standard procedure, built into every level of operations. But it wasn't always that way. Before March 1945, administrative personnel were treated as typing machines. Accuracy mattered. Initiative didn't. Arthur Walsh proved that was wrong. That the people processing information often have the most complete view of what that information actually means. And that creating systems to capture their insights saves lives. Every military clerk who's deployed since World War II operates under protocols that trace back to Arthur's one-word change. They're trained to read critically, to identify contradictions, to flag inconsistencies, not to second-guess command decisions, but to ensure those decisions are based on complete and accurate information. It's not dramatic work. It doesn't involve combat or heroism, just careful attention to detail. And the understanding that paperwork isn't just paperwork. It's the nervous system of military operations. When it's accurate, operations succeed. When it's not, people die. Arthur Walsh understood that. Sitting at his typewriter on March 19, 1945, he made a choice. Follow the rules and type what was written, or break the rules and type what was right. He chose right, changed one word, and saved 800 lives. Not with a weapon, not with tactics, not with anything that looked like traditional heroism, just with the understanding that sometimes doing your job correctly means doing it differently than you were told. That's not insubordination. That's integrity. And Arthur Walsh, a clerk who nobody thought to listen to, proved that sometimes the most important decisions are made by the people everyone assumes don't make decisions at all.